Sorry.
I'm breaking using my microphone. Good evening. I'm Councillor Lisa Homan. I am Chair of the Policy and Oversight Board. Welcome to the meeting this evening. Before we go on to the agenda, I've just got a few housekeeping points I need to mention. Firstly, the meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. So by participating in the meeting, you are agreeing to being recorded. Could I please ask the officers that are speaking to us tonight to say who they are and introduce themselves when they speak, please? Thank you. If a fire alarm should sound, hopefully it won't, but it has happened, please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the fire exit, which is on my right behind me, I understand, and officers will direct us to the assembly point. If anybody needs assistance, please indicate to an officer. So housekeeping done. I am going to move on to the agenda and firstly ask if we have any apologies for absence.
Just Councillor Helen Rowbottom.
Councillor Helen Rowbottom. Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Is there any items on the agenda that members of the committee would like to declare an interest in? No, no declarations of interest. Thank you. Could we then move to the minutes of the meeting, the previous meeting, which is actually some considerable time ago now. It was in April. I think we cancelled the meeting that we had in July because a little thing called the general election got in our way. And we might hear a little bit more about that when we get onto the voter report a bit later. Anybody like to raise anything out of the minutes? No. No, I believe you've also got an action sheet here with various things that came out of the last meeting. I've looked through it and most of them are done or they are going to be coming back to the November meeting. So is everybody happy with the actions? There's nothing they want to raise from that at the moment. Agreed. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So the next item we have on the agenda is the resident experience briefing. If I could just say a few words about this before I invite officers to give us a short presentation. This was an item that was sort of requested, and I think everybody welcomed the idea of understanding exactly what the journey for our residents is when they contact the council. There's been a lot of work going on in terms of the resident experience access programme, which I think started before COVID, but then got a lot of hiccups. So it felt very appropriate to find out where we are on that journey now and have the committee's input before you kind of take the programme any further. I think it recently went to Cabinet, but obviously the input from this committee hopefully could be taken on board should anything come up this evening that might be helpful. So thank you. If I could go over to officers to present a short report. Thank you. Is it Nicola? You're going to go first. Yeah.
Yeah, Nicola Ellis, Director of Corporate Services. So as Councillor Homan said, we have brought a short presentation really to look at some of the factors around our resident experience currently. As you know, we are working on the resident experience and access programme at the moment, and we have recently looked at refreshing that programme to take account of some changes since the REAP programme was introduced, which was pre-COVID 2019. So we're now calling it REAP Reignite, and there are some areas that we are going to talk to you about today that are shown on the first slide, just to give some background to the resident experience as it currently is, and to talk a bit about some of the work that we've done with our residents to look at their expectations going forward. So it'll be a bit of a double act between myself and Yvonne Hadlands, who will introduce herself. But if we can move on to the next slide, you can see the amount of contact that we have as a council. It's 1.7 million times a resident contacts us during the year. Now, the breakdown is quite interesting, and it's not really going to be as accurate as it could be around the digital channel, because we feel that some of the areas in the digital channel that have been counted, we're probably not capturing everything. But even so, we can still see that there's a huge amount of opportunity there to reduce the telephone channel and to allow more opportunities for digital interaction with the council. What happened when we went through COVID was we really reduced the number of face-to-face contacts. So people really got out of the swing of coming into the office and seeing someone face-to-face. And we really developed the opportunity for people not to have to do that. And so you can see that our contact around face-to-face is only 9% now. Prior to us commencing the REAP programme, it was much higher than that. So the landscape has really changed in the period since COVID. But those figures are just there just for your information to show that obviously residents are still contacting us a lot, and our vast majority is by telephone. We were asked as well to talk about one of the means of contact that we've got, which is really, really popular with residents. It's called Love Clean Streets. And it's used on any smartphone and the website. And people use that to report incidents such as fly tipping, misbins, problems in the highways, anything like that. It's been really, really effective, and people are really into the swing of reporting, taking photos, and being able to interact with us via that method. And so I think it's a really good template for how our residents can adapt to digital contact and how they're able to basically shift contact from telephones and get really familiar with another means very easily. So you can see that in the slide, we can see the number of reports that we have, and you can see that even in from January to July, we've had 1,309. So we have quite a lot of interactions through the Love Clean Streets app. There were 37,000 reports between April 23 and March 24. So it's a big proportion really in the scale of the contact. So we've put some links on there for you to have a look at if you are not familiar with Love Clean Streets. It looks as well, looking at the next slide, please, that we are having increasing contact, and we can see when that contact is coming through as well. So we can see that Mondays is often the busiest day. Probably people have been out and about over the weekend and they've seen things, and then they report them to us on the Monday morning. So just to highlight one of the methods that people are contacting us. The next slide is shows the reports broken down by ward. So it just highlights the amount of data that we can get when we are interacting digitally through some of these areas. And I meant to hand over to Yvonne at this stage.
Thanks, Nicola. So I'm Yvonne Hadlands. I'm the Assistant Director for Resident Contacts. So my teams mainly deal with the main contact centre for Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So all sort of general calls coming in from switchboard, revenues and benefits, permits, all the environmental areas, and they're the main contact centre. Although there is other smaller contact centres obviously across the council as well. So following on from what Nicola was saying, so obviously we've got a pie chart there for you, which gives some details around the Love Clean Streets app. And just obviously about the sort of top categories, really. You can see that 42.3% of reports are for fly tipping, which I don't think we would be surprised by that. And I think it's really useful with the app that obviously you can actually report the fly tipping, take a photo, and you can also get updates on the Love Clean Streets app notifications when it's been cleared. So if multiple residents report the same fly tip, they'll be advised that it hasn't been reported, but they can ask for an update. So they'll be notified when that's been cleared, or if for any reason there's some delays as well, or it may be on private land, those updates go through as well. Obviously, the second one, main one, is sort of missed waste collections as well, which is really useful. So obviously people can report it as they need to. So moving on to the next sort of slide, we've got some information around our different types of service channels. So obviously we do have different access points across the council. We're not closing any channels, we're not closing any doors. So as Nicola said, we still provide a really good face-to-face service. I know lots of local authorities have gone down different routes, but obviously we have our face-to-face services all available here. And obviously there's also touch points at the libraries as well, which they sort of deliver a really good customer service there as well. We have our main contact centres, as you're aware of, the telephony contact centres across the council. And we have lots of different functionality within those contact centres. So we have callback facilities. So if you're in the queue, you can choose to have a callback, so you don't have to wait for a long wait. You can also have a proactive text option. So when you're in the queue, say you want to make a new claim for housing benefit, we can send you the link and it will go straight to your smartphone, so you don't have to wait in the queue and you can go through. So we have lots of different types of functionality across the services. And that's not just within the main contact centre, obviously that's council-wide in the other areas as well that have the NetCall platform. So obviously online services, you know, what many of our customers choose to interact with us with. You know, most of our customers and residents are quite used to that. They want to be able to access service 24/7. So, you know, they're not restricted to contacting us between 9 and 5. And we want to be able to, you know, improve that service so that they've got an end-to-end journey and they get their notifications and their updates, and that's part of REAP. Obviously, we have social media platforms as well, and also communication forums. I think I'm handing back to you at this point.
I'm sure you'll be aware that we have a group of residents and officers and members called the Digital Accessibility Group. And we have worked really closely with this group in order to co-produce our work that we've been doing through the Resident Experience and Access Programme. And one of the other examples that's been to this committee before is our digital inclusion strategy. Well, we've spoken to our residents as part of the Digital Accessibility Group to look about the kind of behaviours that they defined as delivering a positive resident experience. And so we thought it was quite interesting to summarise some of that for you. So in order to have a positive resident experience, our residents would like us to be polite, attentive, helpful, proactive, responsive, accountable, good communication, understanding, empathy and flexibility. I think that's really quite interesting, and I think we would assume that that's what our residents want. But what some of the interesting things are proactive, I think, is an interesting one. So that through the REAP programme, we're looking at proactive contact with residents and also being able to deal with the whole range of services that the council offers when a resident contacts us. So one example of that really is through the cost of living team, where residents are contacting us potentially because they've got an issue with paying an energy bill or wanting a referral to the food bank. But as part of that, we're looking at other options that could be made available to that resident to support them in their financial situation at that time. So there's some quotes there from some of the residents as to what they felt at places they felt they'd had a positive resident experience. And there's a couple there, one from the Design Museum and one from an energy company. And I think those are quite good examples of areas that we are looking at and that we want to deliver. I mean, in particular, the Octopus Energy one, where they're looking at sharing a screen and working with someone to support them with their online application for something, is something that's really important to us going forward as well. We also asked residents about their priorities when accessing Hammersmith and Fulham Council's services. And we asked about what defined a negative resident experience. Again, I think they're probably things that we would expect. We don't expect our staff to be rude or show indifference, disrespect, complexity. And that's an interesting one, complexity, because we are obviously, as officers of the council, very familiar in what our services deliver and how residents can apply for those services, but we need to obviously understand that that is not simple for everyone, and we need to make things as accessible as possible for our residents. So I think those areas there are really quite interesting and areas that we are looking at as objectives for the delivery of the best resident experience at Hammersmith and Fulham Council. And there are some examples there of when an experience has not been as positive as it could be. So in summary, we had some priorities when accessing Hammersmith and Fulham Council services and what residents want. And they want us to make them feel valued, be attentive and good listeners. They want digital information and forms that are available and easy to use, but they do want the option to speak to someone if they need to. And that links into what Yvonne was saying about us still having access via other means to support those people that need it. They want us to take ownership, be professional, empathetic and understanding. And they want the staff and online information to help them understand processes, manage expectations. I think that's a really important one as well. People want to know how long it's going to take us to deal with something, when they can expect a response from us. And it's really important that we make sure that we give that information to residents at the first point of contact. They want us to know when they last got in touch with us and what it was about. So that's talking really about having a customer contact record so that we can be aware of why the resident has been in contact with us before and be able to refer to their own situation, make it a more personal experience for them. They want us to be lively and interested in the query, and they want to be able to find out information on the website easily without clicking on too many pages. So I think all of those things are within the objectives of our REAP programme going forward. So hopefully that will help us achieve what our residents really expect and want from us going forward.
So the next slide is just a bit of an overview really of how customers' expectations have really changed in recent years and sort of what we're learning from feedback from our customers as well. And this all very much links into the Reignite programme. So thinking about having seamless and quick transactions and being able to have good online experiences end to end with updates as well, and not like we talk about managing expectations, making sure that we're advising our residents when we will respond to them by, how long that's going to take, and being really clear with our service agreements. Connected experience across digital channels. So thinking about all the different areas. So we've got, lots of organisations and we have social media channels as well, and not just limiting it to the basics of, the contact centre face-to-face, and letting people have access through different areas as well and different channels. So they're really keen to align with our values of our organisation. And we also need to think about personalisation. As you know, many organisations now will give you feedback and they'll make sure that they address it to you personally with your name, and they'll understand what your needs are, especially in sort of the services industry, sort of like retail. They'll give you personalisation and choices. Data protection and privacy obviously is very important, and they need to have trust in our organisation that their data is kept safe. Higher expectations really have been driven by innovation. So obviously we do expect everything to sort of be now. So we're used to that now. We get the answers. If we need to know something, we can go on Google, we can go on website, and our customer expectations are changing in that way as well. They don't no longer, our customers maybe 10 years ago, or residents, I call them, sorry, customers, residents, they would come on, they may say, well, why was my bin missed? And they would be happy even if we didn't know why their bin has been missed. That isn't the case now. people want to know what's happened and they expect us to know what the issue has been. Has the round been missed? Did the vehicle break down? And we have to have an answer. And obviously there's been lots of changes after the pandemic, and obviously Nicola mentioned those as well, how we've had sort of quite a lot of channel shift. There was lots of changes across the pandemic, and especially with the walk-in services at 145 King Street here as well. So there's lots of changes going on there, and also opening up and expanding our channels too. So the next slide, sorry, it's quite a busy slide, but I probably won't go into all the detail on this, but this just gives you an overview really of what we're doing within REAP. So, you know, customer-centric culture, we're looking at obviously driving change. You can change all the digital systems and different functionality and put everything in place you need, but you need all of your teams to come along with you on that journey and want to deliver that for the resident in the same way. So data-driven insights, we're really good at collecting lots of data. Sometimes we don't do too much with it afterwards. So we're looking at sort of, you know, developing that within REAP. Personalisation I touched on. Omni-channel experience, like I say, we've got lots of different ways of contacting us. Social responsibility and sustainability, employee training and empowerment, innovation, feedback, and we'll talk a little bit about customer satisfaction in a minute, and that feedback loop. Proactive customer support and transparency and trust. I think we'll go on to the next slide now, please. This slide really just gives you a bit of a brief overview, and we make sure that we attend all of the corporate inductions for all new starters. So we make sure that we really drive and start to get them to think about the resident and customer experience right from when they join the organisation. And obviously through REAP over the last few years, we've been delivering refresher programmes with lots of team. We delivered some refresher workshops to over 300 members of staff over 2021-22, and we're going through that and doing that again as well. So it's just about the golden thread really from our key priorities as an organisation and a council around the resident experience programme of thinking about accessibility, equality and fairness for all, and that includes our customers and our residents that we're delivering services to. And complaints are in there as well, because obviously that's an important, it gives us feedback and insight, and it's also obviously really important that we're responding to that and we're learning from those poorer experiences. And then on the next page, I'll go over to the next one. We look at resident focused behaviours. So these are some of the 8 key customer and resident focused behaviours. So again, this is driven right from the beginning, from when a new starter comes in their induction and all the way through, about providing, I won't read them all through, but, you know, consistent service. These are some of the principles within REAP. You know, thinking about the impacts and our actions that they have on residents and customers when we make a decision, delivering accessible services, accurately resolving inquiries, and taking ownership of those as well, wherever they may land, and they come in across, because we've got so many touch points across the council. So taking time to understand our residents and customer needs, learning from our residents, and we'll talk about feedback, and treating fairly and recognising diversity as well. Moving over to customer satisfaction surveys. So this is just a bit of an overview of where we are at the moment working in the REAP work stream. So this is sort of led by me at this time. So we had some primary surveys in place for customer satisfaction on our website. We're currently developing our customer satisfaction tools. So all of the different sort of channels and points that customers come into us, we're looking at gathering that feedback. So that will be through text, customer service feedback, messages at the end of calls. It can be through paper surveys, you know, to make sure it's accessible to all. And we're looking at that in our sheltered accommodation schemes at the moment. We have surveys that we're looking at developing, and we've just sort of gone ahead with those. We've been complaints as well to get feedback on those. So lots of different areas. And what we're planning to do is to get a whole new BI dashboard for customer satisfaction, so we can actually get a really good overview of what's happening across the council. So I've just given you on the next slide a little bit of information regarding the customer satisfaction scores. This is in the Housing Repairs Contact Centre. And I've particularly picked this area up because obviously it's been a real focus and a real area of focus across the council the last few years, just to show where the satisfaction is improving from our customers over, steadily across the year. And you can see like quite a good increase over the last few months as well. So really good overall satisfaction. And like you say, on the graph there, different explaining the next steps, the person being helpful, was the waiting time satisfactory, and was a person knowledgeable. And the following slide is also for housing, continues for the Housing Repairs Contact Centre, but this is a bit of benchmarking information. So we have a CX feedback tool where we gather the customer satisfaction on the Repairs Contact Centre. And we can actually compare ourselves to, because there's many organisations use CX feedback, and we can compare them to similar organisations that that have similar questions to us. So it gives us a benchmarking tool. So you can see there Hammersmith and Fulham compared to the other organisations over the 12 months. And then the graph on the right shows, you can see where there's been significant improvements over the last 3 months in customer satisfaction. And I think that is the end of the slide.
Great, thank you very much. There's a lot in there. I'm going to start with one sort of overarching question, and then I'll ask the committee if they've got things that they'd like to contribute. Obviously, I think you started off by saying that the REAP programme was in place before COVID, and there's been a massive channel shift since then. So this is kind of picked up and running with where we are now. In terms of all of these things, which are absolutely great, and it's all the right things to do, but where do you think we are on that journey? I know there is a report that will be coming to Cabinet, which is sort of consolidating a lot of this, but where do you think we are on that journey compared to where we were, say, immediately as we came out of COVID, in terms of delivering some of this? Because I'm sure all of us have got residents that will probably say, they're talking a load of rubbish here. But on the other hand, we will have residents that are actually quite pleased with some of the services and some of the improvements they've seen in terms of the way we respond to them. So I just wondered where you see we are on that journey, and then I'll ask the other members of the committee if they've got questions. Yeah.
I'll answer first, and then Yvonne may want to add. I think what you've just said has probably highlighted completely where we are on that journey, in that we have some areas that are further on than others in that journey, and we are struggling with consistency of resident experience across the whole council. Obviously, a lot of focus has gone on to the Housing Repairs Contact Centre, for example, and that's now really upping in terms of satisfaction. There are other contact centres across the council where there are opportunities probably for us to improve the resident experience. And I think Reignite, i.e. the refresh of REAP, is looking at consolidating those contact centres and making sure we have a more consistent experience for our residents across the board. So I think we're in a mixed position at the moment. In some areas, we're further forward than others, and what our challenge is to get everyone to the same level. That's my answer. Is there anything else?
I think also as well, I think we are further along the journey, because I think we definitely are looking more at the customer satisfaction elements and gathering that data and learning from our data. I think back before COVID, although we had lots of data, I don't necessarily think we really done very much with it, and we didn't look at the learning and the experience from that. And I think our journey along complaints has taught us a lesson in a way, and that we're making sure that we're sort of using that feedback so more readily, really, and making sure that we're going back and looking at the customer journey. So like Nicola said, there's so much more to do, but I do think that's one place where we have moved along quite a lot over the last couple of years.
Okay, thanks. Members of the committee, anybody got any questions? Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
Good evening. I've got a number of questions. How many of the staff that answer all these queries are working in Hammersmith during the day in council offices, and how many are working at home?
I don't think we know the answer for that completely, in terms of figures, mixed amount. So some people work from home. Within the corporate contact centre, there's a rota, and it's on a 4-weekly cycle. So people will be in the office for some of that, working here or working on the phones, and often that might be at home when they're working on the phones. Different contact centres, like telephony contact centres, have different arrangements. For instance, the housing repairs contact centre are in the office all the time. So it's different for different areas. So I couldn't give you the exact figures for every contact centre across the council. Within resident contacts, we could provide the figures for that contact centre, but it is different across the council.
Well, perhaps you could send me the figures after the meeting, please.
We can for the
Yes,
contact centre
thank-
corporate
thank
one.
you.
Yeah.
Look, secondly, it's very clear that 46% contacts by telephone is obviously the by far the largest method used. I would suggest that if things are simple and people are doing something, they fill it in online. But when they have complaints, they're calling on the telephone because it's specific and they can't explain it on a form. Do you agree that that is probably the reason for the high number of calls?
No, I don't agree that they're contacting us because they're complaining for that high number of calls. I think there are a number of services that are not yet available online and they need to contact us by phone at this moment. So I don't think we've grasped all the opportunities, but I agree with you completely. In an ideal world, and once REAP has fulfilled its ambitions, that would be the case, that the only people calling us in an ideal world would be those people who've got really complex queries and need to discuss that with an officer, or those people who need an assisted service from us. But at the moment, it's certainly not the case that everyone's ringing, complaining. It's a mixture of people accessing services via phone because that's the best opportunity for them to access the service currently.
As far as thank you. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time this kind of information has come to this scrutiny panel. Do you have data, customer satisfaction data from previous years?
I think that's one of the points that Yvonne was raising, that we are developing that at the moment to develop a dashboard. I think where we've been previously is that there has been sort of ad hoc customer satisfaction surveys going on throughout different departments within the council. And what we're trying to do now is combine that into a uniform way of measuring customer satisfaction so that we can report that regularly across all service areas. But we're not quite there yet, but that's the work that we're working on at the minute.
Thank you. One resident has had a problem in August with getting hold of people in the council tax office. Unfortunately, he was paying his council tax by cheque, which obviously I suggested was not the best way of doing it, and is now doing it by direct debit. But the point is that he actually had to wait on the phone for over half an hour on 2 occasions. And he'd actually been threatened with a summons by the council because the council had lost one of his cheques. So do you see that the stress for this poor man? Anyway, it's been resolved, but you know, a wait of half an hour. Does it have the callback system on it? But it does.
Yeah, if that, so council tax benefits do have a callback option on there, so you don't have to wait in the queue if you're in there for a long time. We did have, we're just looking at that at the moment, so we did have a functionality on there which told you which place you were in the queue. That's really beneficial sometimes, because sometimes if you come onto a contact centre, you know, if you're first or you're fifth or you're sixth in the line. Although that sometimes doesn't work perfectly, because obviously we don't, sometimes it does an average of how long each call's taken that day. So it may not always work. It's done on the basis that an algorithm and a calculation, but sometimes that's, even if you're first, you might still wait quite a long time. So what we're looking at the moment is reviewing that to give you your estimated wait time. So at least you know, and then you can make that decision then of whether you want to request the callback.
That kind of thing is immensely useful to how people plan their day. It's like the bus stops having the length of time you have to wait.
Yeah.
Because it means you can decide what you're going to do and make your plans. So that would be a very good improvement. Look, the last point for the moment is obviously I'm very shocked by the pie chart on page 33, showing what a huge proportion of complaints are made about fly tipping, the 42.3%. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because the bulky waste collection charge has been nearly doubled. So it was inevitable that some people would decide that they weren't going to do that and have started fly tipping. But fly tipping is such a dreadful scourge on the borough because it makes it look so unkempt. Have you noticed this rising? Do you know specifically on that figure?
I'll just say something quickly, just to point out that doesn't mean that 42% of all of the complaints were fly tipping. It's just that this particular app is used for those reports. 42% of those reports on that app.
No, I understand.
Okay.
There may well be more that come in other ways, but I use the app.
Yeah,
It's easy,
isn't it?
It's incredibly simple,
yeah,
easy. The fact is you get an answer, so you actually feel as though you're getting something done,
yeah.
Which is very satisfying.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you know,
It's a big proportion of those.
Yes, it is.
I'll let you answer if there's any progresses.
It's not something that I'm significantly aware of in the contact centre, that we've seen a big rise in fly tipping reports through the contact centre. What I can do is I can go back and look at the data for the Love Clean Streets Act for the previous year and have a little look at comparison for that. And I can also look at the contact centre as well. More than happy to provide that information so you can see if there's been
Would you email me?
Of course, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Yvonne and Nicola. Thank you.
Before I bring Councillor in, can I just follow up on a couple of those points? On the callbacks, I just wondered, do we have a percentage of the number of people that use the callback service? And do we know how long it takes for them to be called back on average? So, you know, are they waiting an hour? Are they waiting a whole day? You know, how long are they waiting? That was one point. The other point, I might as well ask both at the same time. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it might be, and I feel a bit guilty about this, Conningham Ward comes up the highest on the Love Your Streets. I think I mentioned this to you before, on the Love Your Streets app. And it's something I'm always encouraging people to do, because I say, if you report it on the Love Your Streets app, then it will get sorted. And so people tend to report it. So if the fact that our ward is highest, it is bigger. All right, it might be bigger. Yeah.
All of the wards are on that pie chart.
No. Some wards, yeah. But the fact that, you know, it seems to me to be a good thing in that we're actually encouraging people, and I do know it gets acted on quite quickly. So just a comment on that. And finally, if somebody reports through that app and the fly tip, for example, happens to be on housing land, does it still get dealt with in the same way? That's my final question, and then I think Councillor Ree wanted to pick up a couple of the points. Yeah.
Thanks. So just regarding the Love Clean Streets app, so depending on, yes, it's a bit of a tricky one because obviously if it isn't straightforward and it isn't clearly, we can't clearly identify whose land it is. So it may need there be some further checks that are done on that. But the app normally is updated to say whether they've been able to clear it or not, and it could get passed to the estates team if it wasn't one of of our housing areas, and then they would deal with that there. So there is different routes it will go down, but it won't just get ignored and they won't just get told, no, we're not collecting it. It will get passed over to the relevant team. So in regards to the callbacks, so I do have the data of how many people use the callback option. Can't tell you off the top of my head now, but I do have the data and that is split out in the call reporting and the length of time that you wait. So I can probably check what the average is. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it not close enough? Sorry. I can check what the average wait time is, but what happens with the callback is that it doesn't just sit in a separate queue. So once someone's requested a callback, it stays in our same queue. And as soon as one of the advisors is available, that call drops in for them to respond. So it doesn't just sort of, we did have it work differently a few years ago, but we've changed that now. So what happens is as soon as an advisor is free, that call that's waiting to be responded to, they'll pick it up. So they could get a call back in half an hour. They could get a call back in 2.5 hours. It may depend on how busy the contact centre is that day. But as soon as an advisor is available, they pick it up.
Councillor Ree, I think you wanted to come in on something.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Rowan Ree, Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me along to the committee this evening. I think these are two very interesting papers. I'm looking forward to hearing the committee's discussion. I had a couple of points I wanted to make, but I did just want to pick up on the last point that Councillor Brockle-Bankfowler raised about fly tipping. Obviously, the purpose of this app is for people to report issues within the borough. They're not necessarily complaints, it's reporting things. The council can't reprogram people to stop dropping litter, but once it's there, people can use this service to report it, right? I think you're slightly confused when you talked about the increase of fly tipping in the borough. There is no increase in fly tipping in the borough. The latest figures from January show that fly tipping is down by 1/3. Now that's the biggest reduction in the whole of London. So I'm not quite sure where you get your figures from, but they're very much wide of the mark. If you could go back to some of the earlier questions, though, perhaps about working from home. I wanted to ask a question of my own, if that's all right. We don't have any evidence, do we, that residents receive a worse customer service from members of staff when they're working from home, do we?
No, not at all. In general, the opposite, really, because there are less distractions and people are more focused on the resident experience. So, yeah, I mean, we have found that working from home for contact centres has worked really well for us.
Thank you very much. Obviously, there'll be certain things that people will need to be in offices or on council sites for, but yeah, I don't have any sort of great ideological commitment to dragging people into an office if they don't necessarily need to be there, and if they work more effectively elsewhere. And that goes for contact centres, it goes for other areas of the council's work as well. I think Councillor Brockle-Bankfowler raised a very important point about digitalisation and automation. I think that's perhaps one of the points that this report sort of hints at, but doesn't quite cover in great detail. And that's that a lot of people who do contact the council don't necessarily want to have a long chat with a council officer. When I'm filling in my council tax forms online, I can click on a link, I can go through, I can do it in 2 minutes and it's done. I don't necessarily want to sit down and have a cup of tea with a council officer and chat about what I'm paying and how I'm doing it. And so I think part of this is the digitalisation element you spoke about, is trying to create a means for people in other areas of the council to use services online, so that doing so takes up far less of their time. The great thing about that as well is that it means that it takes up far less of officers' time. We've got a lot of very well-trained, very capable officers here working for the council. And if they're spending their time talking to residents, doing mundane, easy to automate tasks, then it means that they're not doing some of the more complicated things that that they could be doing. So there will be a process to try and improve automation in that sense as well, so that we can free up officers' time for things that they really need to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ree. Councillor Perez and then Councillor Vaughan. Councillor Vaughan was first. Okay, Councillor Vaughan. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I mean, just following on from that previous point, actually, electoral registration is a good example of something that can be done very quickly. I think for the last few years have had an email every July or August, which spend about 2 minutes clicking through the links and making sure I filled it in. And that is my sum total of what I need to do in order to do electoral registration and the sort of canvas effectively for the year. So I think that's probably an example of something that works well, is a process that can be gone through and is clearly collected digitally. So, well, congratulations to the voter registration team. So thank you, first of all, for this report. I thought it was very clear. I thought the presentation was really clear as well. I thought we can discuss some of the facts, but I thought they were very interesting as well. I mean, I suppose so I've got sort of several related questions. In terms of achieving the better outcome in terms of customer service, I appreciate that we're sort of on a journey, but also that, you know, you're obviously getting some way towards it. I mean, in terms of going further, clearly you've spoken about some of this already, I wonder if you could say something about staff training, ensuring consistency, because in achieving some of the things that you put down here that were examples about polite, attentive, helpful, presumably we're going to want well-trained, empathetic staff who are, particularly when they're dealing on the phone with customers, residents, are going to be all of those things and give that good service. And I wondered what plans are in place to ensure that you, across some of those sort of call centre, contact centre models, you've got plans in place to ensure training, and also sort of quality assurance of the consistency of the experience of customers come residents.
Thank you. Yes, so we do already have really good, robust quality assurance checks within the contact centre. So they are done on a weekly basis. I actually have an overview of a dashboard, so I can go in and see how many are being done and what the scores are as well. So as soon as the team leaders pick up any issues, if there is any issues, then they can go back, and that's positive and negative. So, you know, we make sure that we feed back on positive experience as well. Our quality assurance checks are robust, and they score, all the advisors score very highly across my contact centre. We have introduced, there is other smaller contact centres across the council that are using the same functionality as us. This is all inbuilt within our systems. They have quality assurance checks in place as well. What I'm looking to do is to make sure that that's a bit more of a consistent approach across the whole of the council, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with the quality assurance checks they have in place now. But what I want to make sure is that we're all aiming towards the same target, really. And there is some contact centres across the council that probably don't have those robust quality assurance checks in place. So at the moment, I'm working with a couple of improvement boards, and I'm working at getting that in place across all of the contact centres. So we've got a consistent approach to how we're handling our, customers and residents' inquiries.
Thanks very much. I wonder, sorry, just as a slight, possibly a follow-on to that, although maybe going off a slightly different tangent. How easy is it to get the sort of customer feedback? Because one thing I was quite interested in the housing customer satisfaction, which it was interesting that it was sensitive to sort of an issue or problem that last year, where there was clearly a dip and then it went back up again. And that was, I think you've suggested on the slide, for a particular reason. So it's interesting. But how much of the sort of customer feedback do you get after each contact? Because in a sense, you'd probably think that possibly if people had really good experience, they might be wanting to say something about that. And if they had a poor experience, they'd want to say something about that. So you might not get a good sample necessarily of customer satisfaction if clearly it's optional as to whether people feedback or not. I mean, obviously, if you spent an hour on the phone, perhaps you don't want to, if that's the case, you don't want to give any feedback. Or if you've had a really, if you sort of been happy with it, but whatever. Anyway, so I wonder if you could just explain how good you think how often you get the customer feedback and how good that sort of sample of data is in producing this information.
So at the moment we're piloting in our telephony system the customer feedback tool. This is different from the customer contact feedback that I've just shared with you through housing. They've got that set up through a different digitals platform. Okay, so but we have got this functionality within our telephony system, which is used widely across the council. So at the moment, I'm piloting the customer satisfaction feedback there. That customer satisfaction survey is offered at the end of every call. So you're advised at the start of the call in the contact centre that there's going to be a survey. You can opt out, you can opt in. It's completely your choice. So at the moment, it's a bit of a pilot, but what the data is showing me at the moment is that it is really a mix. We do actually get quite good volumes of customer satisfaction feedback coming back at the end of the call. It's actually quite good data, and it is really very split. So we do get overall satisfaction on this particular survey is marked out between 1 and 5, obviously 5 being really good service, exceptional service, but there is a few other questions in there as well. But overall satisfaction 5 is what we score the highest at. But we also do get 1s and 2s. And we can go in and on this particular pilot, you can also leave your individual feedback at the end of that call. So you don't just have to do it by the questions, I mark you 1 to 5, I score you 1 to 5. At the end, if you want to actually tell us about your experience, good or bad, you can actually leave a direct voicemail and we'll pick that up in text so that we can get that feedback directly. And it's actually, we've got quite a lot of data that's coming through on that pilot at the moment.
I mean, I think it'd be interesting to hear more about that in due course. So yeah, it's good to hear that you're getting that data. I just want to pick up on a final point, which is about flexibility, which was, and perhaps signposting might be the way of describing this, but clearly flexibility is one of the things that you picked up on here. Clearly there are a number of different ways of contacting the council digitally and through telephone and perhaps face to face. But clearly some people, I think it's sort of suggested here, clearly people might have 3 issues that they want to take up at a particular time. They'd sort of have to go potentially to 3 different places. Is there more that we can do or you are doing to sort of join that up so that if they contact someone in the sort of corporate contact centre, they might either be able to signpost them or to take the 3 issues, which one might be about housing, one might be about voter registration, one might be about council tax. How do we sort of grapple with the fact that people have got more than one thing that they want to do potentially? I mean, obviously in some cases it might be, or perhaps they've come through to the wrong place. Do they get signposted sort of attentively either onto the website or to another area to deal with their issue?
So at the moment, it's a little bit of a mixture, okay, across the council. So in the main contact centre, which is one of the main area that sits under in my area, it's quite a big contact centre. We handle around about 20,000, 21,000 calls a month. So it's quite high volumes and it is really big mixture of services. It's very difficult to have one officer trained in every single skill set because that's an awful lot of knowledge and experience you need, and it sort of dilutes the service a little bit. So we can have what we call warm transfers. So if they are transferring over to another team, a warm transfer is where they don't just release the call and then the customer has to, or the resident has to go through all of their details again. They do a warm handover and a warm transfer. So they've taken all that data, they've taken all that information and then they've passed that all on when they're transferring a call. So for example, at the moment in our main contact centre, they might have to transfer a customer or resident over to the housing homelessness team, and they can take all that information beforehand so they make sure they're not having to repeat themselves again if they've come through maybe on the switchboard line first. So we're trying to make sure that that's a good experience and it isn't just a cold what we call a cold transfer. We try to provide some resilience in the contact centre so that we do cross-skill and train our officers so that we have to have sort of quite a wide sort of skill set. So we've got officers that will deal with council tax, benefits and complaints, corporate-wide complaints, and they've got access to all of those systems so they can get that information up readily available to them. So we try and make it a bit of a mix. And I think what will help us going forward will be the CRM that we're looking in place. So that will obviously capture our residents' data, and then we'll be able to have sort of options to integrate off to different systems to request things to be done. So we may then be able to stop that customer having to do that next call. We can just take the information and send it off to where it needs to go for them.
Could I just say something on that as well? Just to say that that's one of the key objectives of REAP, really, because if we have all of our processes and interactions available in a digital process, then our contact centre staff, even when dealing with someone over the phone who's not able to access the service digitally themselves, they can access all of those services digitally and therefore deal with the whole of the residents' inquiry for different service areas. So those objectives are all part of REAP, really, to try and get as many services available self-service, because even staff can use that self-service to support residents.
No, thank you very much. It's really interesting. Look forward to hearing more about it in due course.
Councillor Perez.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Natalia Perez, Chair of the Health, Adult Social Policy Accountability Committee. Thank you very much for the report. So I have a question in relation to, you gave us a figure at the beginning of the presentation. You said 1.7 million contacts. Okay. Do we also monitor the residents that may call maybe twice or 3 times for a repeat question or repeat concern? And have we looked at it from a system thinking perspective, thinking about ways in which we can improve that process and make it more efficient, rather than having to call 3 times about the same issue, maybe call once? That's my first question, please.
So in regards to trying to answer and resolve the whole inquiry, we like to try and aim to do that so that we resolve everything at the first point of contact to stop the resident having to call us back. It's better for us, obviously, and it's better for the resident if we can improve that experience. So we do try to aim to do that. We do have activity codes at the end of a call in the contact centre where we record what that call was about. And we're gathering data at the moment around what we're resolving at the first point of contact without any further handover or without the customer or the resident having to come back to us again. Regarding repeat callers, we can pull that data out. I can get all of the records of all of the calls, and I'm able to see how many repeat callers we have. It's not something that we've actually delved into that much at the moment, but I think it is definitely very important, and we need to look at doing that when we get sort of a little bit more digital expertise through REAP and with some dashboards as well.
Thank you very much. The other question that I have, I know from the report that in relation to complaints, how do we deal with complaints as well? How do we learn from complaints in terms of identifying areas for improvement or areas for development, things where we can provide a better service? And I also know that the report says that we want to take ownership of those complaints as well. So can you please tell us a little bit more about that process? Thank you.
I'll say something first. Linking into your previous question as well, when you mentioned looking from a systems thinking perspective about the reasons for calls and looking at eliminating those calls when they're basically through our fault. Just to say that some of that information has fed into some of the recent service improvement plans. So we have looked at that for housing and for repairs. We did look at repeat callers for repairs as well. because that was obviously indicating that they weren't getting their repair dealt with on time. And in benefits, we've just been through a big improvement program and changed processes to make it much more efficient within that service. And we also have looked at the processes to make sure that we're limiting the need for the resident to contact us and chase us. And we saw a great big decline in our contact around benefits. So that was just on your previous one, really. On complaints, we do a huge amount of work on learning from complaints. The majority of our complaints are relating to the housing service because it's the biggest service area, really. And we have a complaints improvement board that meets on a weekly basis, and we look at the reasons for complaints. We report to all service areas on a monthly basis on their complaints and reasons for complaints. So we've just started a root cause analysis reporting, and all service areas are then expected to look into those reasons and make adjustments in the service. And we corporately monitor trends so that we can see if there is something that's either across the service areas or is a particular issue within a service area, so that we can raise that at corporate through our SLT assurance board, which we report to quarterly.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for bringing this report. It's been really interesting. It's sort of fair enough to say that for many people, that moment of contact, that resident experience is just so really crucial to set the tone on how people feel about where they live and the authority in general. So it's a really crucial piece of work. I am chair of the Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee, and I'm interested in you sort of talking about some of the data that you put in there about housing and some of the improvement in scores. Is there you were just sort of talking about how you report quarterly but is there a dashboard that officers can tap into more regularly than that? Do the officers in the housing departments, do they have more visibility over that? Can they see sort of week by week how and does that, how granular is that? Is the survey data down to the person they're speaking to?
I'll answer that one. So so our complaints system that handles and we hold all the data in for our stage 1, stage 2 complaints and ombudsman. This all sits under my area as well. So as Nicola said, we do have the data. Obviously, you know, we have lots of different types of reports, and we do look at primary causes, root cause analysis. So as Nicola said, we send out regular reports, which we pull together, but we have now gone live with a complaints dashboard, which has all the stage 1 and stage 2 complaint data in it. At the moment, it's work in progress. We have gone live with it. It was rolled out to housing, so probably back in about May. They were the first directorate, really. We asked them to pilot it for us because they had the highest sort of volume in their area. So that dashboard gives them access daily. It's updated twice every 24 hours. So it is literally like live data, and you can see how many complaints you've received, what different services they're for, how many complaints you've closed, have they been closed within time, within the corporate policy, and all that information is there. I'm on the next step with it at the moment, where I'm about to put root causes in and primary causes in as well. So they have all that information around those themes and that data then, and that will be available to them one touch every day. And that's being rolled out across the whole of the organisation and the council.
Thank you very much. I have got a lot of questions about the housing, but maybe I should take that back to the pack and talk to officers about some of that. Can I ask you about some of the ambition? I've just got a couple of questions that I really wanted to ask you around where this is going and what the timeline is. You talked about, and I have noticed that there's been more kind of digital forms available for residents to complete. And it's really reassuring to hear you say that that is the drive for that has come from residents, so they want to be able to engage in that way. That's really reassuring. You talked, and we've had, you know, as you know, digital exclusion here, but you talked about an ambition to have screen sharing, or maybe to speak to somebody whilst filling out those forms, and that from, you know, from the kind of early experience of those forms, I think that would be a really good step to go. And I wondered if you could tell me what sort of timeline that is, and then I'll just roll my second question because it's sort of related, if you don't mind. You're absolutely right. The expectations have increased. We all have much higher expectations, and much of it has been driven from that retailers fighting over our few pennies that we've got left to spend in any one direction. And we now have this sort of world where everything's quite 24/7, and I'm really quite cross if I can't speak to somebody about my delivery at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I'm not really, but sort of theory. And I wondered what that tension was between a public body that has to be really careful about the costs, and that sort of expectation that people have that's increasing about being able to access and have access much more regularly. We don't currently have a lot of access to officers at the weekends. Are we going to try and match that expectation? That's my sort of questions about that tension. Thank you.
I think the REAP programme's ambition is for every service to be available 24/7, but that would obviously be through self-service and through digital channels. I don't think we have any ambition for our phones to be open 24/7, and I don't think that's really what residents' expectations are. I know we've been through times where we've had phone lines open, you know, late nights and Saturday mornings. I think those times have gone, and to enable our service to be accessible 24/7, it is through digital means and self-service. Your other question, I think, was around the timescales for seeing some of the benefits within the REAP programme. Obviously, the programme's ongoing. We are still seeing some benefits, but some of the ones that you've mentioned and some of the ones that are in the latest REAP Reignite paper involve more technology. And we are going through a discovery phase at the moment. We're looking at the technology that's available out there, because we have a digital platform, the My Account, that residents use at the moment. But since we procured that, technology has moved on a lot, and there are more opportunities for us. So we are going through a discovery phase at the moment to look at making sure we get the best technology possible to support the resident experience when we re-procure, which is a process that's starting now. So we're looking at, you know, what developments have been, what there is around artificial intelligence that could support our resident experience. So timelines, it's difficult to tell you timelines for when things will happen. I mean, some of the things that were in the paper were around looking at some of the large amount of phone numbers that we've got in the council and email boxes. And those things are the things that we're focusing on at the moment, trying to reduce those email boxes and introduce more online forms for those, and reduce those contact numbers as well. So it's sort of things are going to be happening in an incremental way over the next few years, really. But we're sort of discovering at the moment as to what that's going to look like and what the opportunities fully are.
Can I just ask a question about the online screen sharing? I think it's great, and it's certainly something that I've done when I've had IT problems. You know, the engineer comes in and they can sort of talk through, or they can take control of your computer. I would have thought there's quite a lot of data protection and security issues around that with some of our services. So I see the quote from Octopus, and it was like, you know, I'm not I don't know, if you're just dealing with somebody's energy account, it seems probably slightly less personal and concerning than if maybe you were talking about putting bank accounts details in for a council tax payment or something, if you see what I mean. So I'm just wondering if we've looked into that very far yet, or if that's something to come.
So I think how we sort of interact and deal with our residents, like you say, I think everyone has sort of a different need. I do think we do need to be quite careful in making any in sharing any screens. We have, since the pandemic and 145 reopened, we have in one of the rooms over there, we call it like a digital booth, if that's what we want to call it. And so if customers or residents came in and when they needed to see an officer and they wanted to have that interaction sort of face to face, but that officer was not available, maybe they weren't, you know, working in this location or a different part of the borough, we can make appointments and so that people can see an officer face to face. But you're talking particularly about sharing a digital form on a screen. And I think, I mean, I haven't actually been anywhere and seen that fully in use in a local authority. So I think we would have to be quite cautious about that.
Yeah. Councillor Sluice.
Thank you, and thank you for your reports. Just a couple of quick questions. It's been very good to see that there's been this improvement in the last year or the last few months on the housing repairs contact centre. It really is encouraging. I was just wondering if you have an idea and could tell us exactly what is driving that improvement, whether it's training or how we've achieved this. And related to this, I know from other organizations that there are also, KPIs as to where we would like to be. Obviously, we would like to be at 100% and everyone is happy and dancing in the streets. But realistically, what are our KPIs for the coming months and years?
So in regards to KPIs, again, it's not necessarily at the moment a consistent approach across all the contact centres across the council. So in my area, it's set at an abandon rate, any abandoned calls at 10% or under, and that I have set KPIs. And my target is to answer 80% of calls within 40 seconds. That's quite a hard target to reach at this time. And we're always reviewing and looking and seeing, because there's no point having something that's completely unachievable. And it does depend on each day, and it does depend on peaks and troughs in the cross contact centres as well. So with regards to KPIs, we're looking at sort of developing through REAP a more consistent set of KPIs across all of the contact centres. In the repairs contact centre, for example, what has significantly driven that change and improvement, 100% is training. The quality checks in place. We have made sure that it's resourced effectively. So it's got a very low abandon rate. What also drives improvement in any contact centre is the improvement in the service as a whole. So we have seen lower volumes of calls coming in to the repairs contact centre where the repairs are being done on time, when the operatives are turning up on time and there isn't delays to the, because that any sort of problems with service drive those calls into the contact centre. If you're sitting waiting at home that day for somebody to arrive and they haven't turned up when they've promised. So I think really rigorous controls and really big improvement in the repairs service overall has driven a reduction in calls but also there's been a huge improvement there with training, quality, knowledge base across the repairs contact centre overall.
Thank you. And I was going actually to ask a follow-up question on abandonment rates. So I'm glad that you brought it up. And I was wondering if you could just, I appreciate it will be different across the different parts of of LBHF, but if you could talk to us a bit more and any trends you are seeing about this, because from residents, anecdotal evidence is they'll always complain that they waited too long and they had to hang up or that no one answered. So it would be good to know how we're doing as an organization on that as well.
So I could tell you in the main contact centre, for the last whole quarter, our abandonment rate was 11.6%, so just over the 10%. There is reasons for that. So we know that there's peaks and troughs, like I say, so it does vary. That's sort of the April, that's quarter one. Yeah, quarter one. So that would be at the annual billing period as well for council tax. So that obviously drives up a big peak in calls on certain days, which sometimes can be difficult to even out across the rest of the period. So I can tell you also in the repairs contact centre, and I think it was for the last month that I looked for, it was a 1.9% abandon rate. So, you know, really, again, it does vary across different contact centres across the council, which is why we really want to bring it in for a more consistent approach.
Anybody got any final questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. I think what it's really highlighted is how it fits in tightly with some of the other items we've had here. So the digital inclusion stuff that's come, we've had co-production here, and we've had AI here as well. And all of that works hand in hand with us as a council trying to produce the best resident experiences we possibly can. I think you probably heard quite a lot about what concerns councillors, and it's obviously that you're on a journey. There's been quite a few requests for bits of data, and I know some of it you can probably provide sort of after the meeting, but it seems to me that as you kind of get to the end of some of these pilots and things, it might be really useful for us to have a quick update so that, you know, we could get your learning from it and how you're then going to kind of try and roll that out further in other areas on the council. So I hope that, you know, some of our comments have been helpful to you. And I think us seeing some of the data would be really helpful going forward as well. And I'd just like to thank the committee for their comments. So thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
We'll just have about 2 minutes and then we'll talk about voter identification. So if anybody needs a quick comfort break, you've got 2 minutes. Okay, thank you, everybody, and welcome back to the Policy and Oversight Board this evening. We're now going to look at our second report, which is an update from Electoral Services on basically information coming back from elections that we have now experienced. It's been a busy time for the team, and the new voting entitlements that are coming forward. So I will hand it over to officers to give us a short presentation and update, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from the committee.
Good evening, members. My name is Kyle Dadumi. I'm the AD in charge of elections, and thank you for inviting us back. I'm going to hand over to Zoe, who will give you a brief introduction, and then we will take questions.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Zoe Wilkins. I'm the Electoral Services Manager for the borough. Thank you for inviting me back. I think it's been a while since we last met. We were anticipating a combined general election with the GLA, I think, at that point. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Yeah, so May and July's elections obviously saw the introduction of voter ID for all our polling stations. It also introduced changes to postal vote application processes, the introduction of online applications for postal votes, and handling restrictions, so who can drop in postal votes into us in our offices, and form filling for members of the public if they were hand delivering their postal votes rather than popping it in the Royal Mail. We also saw the introduction of changes to the voting and candidacy rights for our EU residents. That is now just being implemented imminently. In the next couple of weeks, we will be writing to all of our EU residents to tell them whether or not they've been successfully passported through effectively onto the new registers, or whether or not they need to take action and confirm that they are actually still eligible to register to vote in the UK. This report that you've had really covers those changes, looks back at the voter ID experience and also these other factors that are coming through. One thing you didn't mention at all, either, which I will mention briefly, is about overseas voter registration as well. We now have Votes for Life for residents who go and live overseas. And I'm happy to take questions on that as well, although I didn't touch on it on the report.
Okay. Questions from committee members, I think. I will start off one with about the voter authority certificates. Obviously, we've got ward by ward information here in terms of how many there's been. It's quite interesting because I actually came across a couple of people on election day who said, well, I'm not going to vote because I haven't got any voter, I haven't got any identification that I can take along to the polling station. And I know there was a massive campaign. There was a lot of work done by the council to try and ensure that people knew that there was that option. So I think, how can we improve on that, I suppose, for in future? I know it's a tricky one, but it is still out there as an issue for some people, I think.
Yes, certainly. And although it wasn't available at the time of writing, the Electoral Commission have just released a report on voter ID and the general elections. They released it on, I think, Wednesday or Thursday last week. And they pick up on specifically this issue that the take-up of VAX is low across the country. They were expecting something, there's roughly 750,000 people who would be probably the ideal customers for VACs, but the number of applications was low. I think it may be one of those things that takes time. I think we keep pushing out the message. We keep putting things into our poll cards. We keep around election time putting posters up in libraries and talking to communities and young people and all the groups that are affected that might need a VAC. Ultimately, I think potentially the government now is going to be looking at things like, perhaps, is the list of ID that can be used correct? So that may help us, it may not. We are always going to have a cohort of people, I suspect, who will need to have this additional piece of paper. And unfortunately, I think that also correlates with the people who are going to struggle, perhaps, to get the bureaucracy of that sorted out, even though it's online, even though we will help. Those people perhaps are more likely to find that difficult. But yeah, we keep plugging at it. I think it's the only solution, really.
Thank you. Any members of the committee and Councillor Brockbank-Fowler?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to congratulate you, Zoe, you and your team for running the two elections this year. It was an immense amount of work, and I know that there were many questions with the changes as to how it would all work. And I would say that this paper actually shows how much work you did, and it did work, because there's a drop even of people turning up to vote without ID between the two elections. Significant, given that they were only 6 weeks or whatever it was apart. So I think you've done a very good job on that. And as you said, there was no poor or very little poor behaviour or confusion, did not materialise. I'm quoting from point 36 on page 49, which was something that some people were concerned might happen. So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for what you've done. Wasn't quite the right result, but never mind. You couldn't organise that. I just wanted to check under point 54, your payment, the extra payments for all the different areas of work. You make the point of saying that it's not ring-fenced. Now, does that mean you've received it into electoral services, or you're concerned you might not get it, or could you just explain why that's mentioned? Thank you.
It's basically we've had a grant from central government for under the new burdens legislation. So that money has come into my service for us to spend, but the council, should it wish to, could spend that money on something else. The government hasn't taken the decision to say this money must be spent on this particular activity. It is a grant that's been given to the council with the suggestion that it's used for elections and electoral services, and that's where it's come.
Okay, so following up on that, when are you going to have that confirmed, that the monies in paragraph 55 and 56 as well come to you, so that your budget and so on is secure?
I already have it. I have it, and I've spent some of it. Yeah. We get a formal confirmation from it was the ministry now to say the money has been sent to your account, and obviously our internal finance team will say we've got this money. Is this yours? And I'm very honest, and occasionally it's not mine. But yes, no, I have the money in my account, if you like, for electoral services.
Good. Thank you.
Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and again, thank you for the conduct of the election. I thought it went, both of them went very well. Couple of questions about sort of some of the sensitivities that you've outlined here. I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more about how you're going to do the EU voter stuff, because it sounds like you need to send some people some of the people you can still vote. Can you fill in this form, and others you may not be able to vote? Can you send us some information? Clearly, that's quite sensitive. Well, that would obviously be sensitive, and there does seem like there are 11 or 12,000 of them. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that.
Okay, so the Electoral Commission basically the law is there's two paths that any EU national will follow. Either they will be eligible straightforwardly to carry on being registered to vote if they are from one of the countries that has a bilateral agreement with the UK about voting, or they have been registered to vote since before December 2020. Those people will get a letter just writing to them to say, as you know, there have been changes to the EU rights for voting, and you do not need to do anything at all. that's the letter they will get, mostly because there will be other people potentially in their communities and in their families perhaps who are going to get the other letter where they are not from one of the countries with a bilateral agreement with us, or they have registered to vote more recently than December 2020 at their current address. And they will then need to respond to confirm back to us that, yep, they have got the right to vote here because of their rights to remain in the UK. The letters we use and the templates we use are going to be coming from and already have come from the Electoral Commission, so we are just following their templates. We will do some additional comms, obviously, with the comms team, people like the POSC organisation down the road, some, you know, those kinds of things, just to let people inform them so they can inform their users as well, what this is all about. But in general, we're following a set path. So it's a form, then a reminder. We will be following up with emails as well. If people don't respond that need to, we have to remove them from the register. That doesn't mean that they can't then later register, should they then decide to at a later date, assuming they're eligible, of course.
Thanks, Troy. That's a very clear explanation. Well, I think we'll be interested in how well that campaign goes in due course. I had a couple of other quick questions. Well, hopefully ready for questions. In terms of dealing with how very interested that you've got some great, I mean, the data's good in terms of people who were, for example, use of vax, but also those who were turned away, and then those people actually returned. And it was good to see that although there were quite a lot of people turned away in some cases, that a lot of people actually returned to vote, although clearly some didn't. I wonder if you could just say briefly how that data was recorded and how did sort of officers and presiding officers at the polling stations actually deal with those instances. So presumably they had advised them that they needed to come back with some identification, and clearly they had quite a good hit rate in the sense that obviously a large proportion of those people turned back up. I wonder if there's sort of any, I guess it's more anecdotal evidence as to how people dealt with that and how they were briefed in terms of dealing with people who turned up without the right identification.
Okay, so every polling station, again, this is a legal requirement, had a form designed by the Electoral Commission. So if anybody turned up at a polling station and wasn't going to be issued with a ballot paper because they didn't have the right kinds of ID, had to be recorded. So when they recorded the elector number, and then if that person then turned up again later on, they would be ticked. So the clerks would tick. For us in the borough, we decided to have one of those forms on every issuing table so that the clerks, as they were issuing, would have a quick look down at the elector number. Was this someone that had been in before? Or if not, would take the details. If somebody did arrive without the right kinds of identification, then every team, we gave them sort of almost, you know, tear off pads of a list of the things that people could come back with that would be acceptable. So they would give that to the voter and say, unfortunately, what you've shown me today, or the fact you haven't shown me anything at all. This is the list of things that you can use. And we also had a pictorial display on every polling station table as well, so that we could say these are the things that are available. Here's a handy tear off list that you can take home and have a look just to remind yourself. So that's how it was basic conversations with the poll clerks. All of the poll clerks were trained on how to do that. All of the presiding officers were trained on how to do that. There is an exception. There's a difference in terms of the kind of recording about people who turned away because they've got nothing or they've got the wrong thing. They're showing their staff pass instead of a passport. That's one issue. There was also the thing that only presiding officers could do, which is to refuse a ballot paper, which is someone has shown them what purports to be, say, a passport, but either didn't look like the person or was not in fact a passport or was a forgery of some kind like that. We didn't have any reports of that in the borough. I think we may have had one, but I think that was actually a mistake, having spoken to the PO afterwards. That list was sealed, but the list for the other interactions is available for us to look at and then report back the findings to the Electoral Commission. And obviously I've used that here as well. That's an open data.
Thanks very much. I just had one final question about postal votes and how you apply for, I mean, this is perhaps more educational rather than anything else. Can you apply for both? You can presumably apply for postal votes online, but presumably how do you get the sort of signature bit right? Do you have to feels like because clearly we're in an age where we're trying to get rid of paper, clearly sort of and do it online. There's obviously the requirement, I guess, well, currently at least, to provide a signature, in which case there is a bit more, it's a bit less seamless perhaps.
Yeah, so the portal for applying for postal vote is a national portal. So we can't take credit for this clever bit of technology, but what people do is they put in their information, so their name, date of birth, national insurance number, and they take a photograph using their phone of their signature and upload that image. Now, some people can't do that. They find that difficult, and they would send it without their signature. We could then contact them and ask them to provide their signature on a piece of paper, perhaps by scanning it to us, or indeed by filling out a physical form. So that people can still apply by paper, but just the vast majority of people did it online. And we did have some interesting signatures, as we normally do, but they were a few more where, you know, they got a bit wonky, and we had to get back in touch with people and say, you need to do that again. That's not quite working properly. But generally speaking, people seemed to find that fairly easy, I would say. I mean, there are tweaks on that journey, that whole portal, that we want to see both for members of the public and from the back end. It's got better since it was launched in the new year, improved after the first set of elections, improved again. And in fact, they were sending us some improvements yesterday, things to tweak about messaging back as well. So those things where the signature's not right, that's kind of now automated through the system rather than us having to send an individual email, that kind of thing.
No, thank you very much. That's great.
Councillor Sleuth.
Hello, and thank you, Zoe, and the whole team for all the work you did over these elections. A few questions. I'll try and be brief. Same as you have the data on voters who were turned away because they didn't have the ID. Obviously, the other big change in this election compared to previous ones is that postal votes, both at the point of application and at the point of voting, had the national insurance number. So I'm wondering if you have statistics on votes that were rejected because, for example, there was a national insurance number and did not correspond with previous applications, well, with the application or yeah.
Okay, so when you fill in your actual postal vote, you don't give your national insurance number. It's just your date of birth and your signature.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
It's the application process, it can fail if you don't give your NI number, or it doesn't match up to your name. In that circumstance, what we then do is write to the elector and say, your NI doesn't appear to match up with your name. Can we have some proof of your ID, passport, various other bits and pieces that we're allowed to use, and then they have a postal vote. If that still fails, they don't get a postal vote. I probably can have a look at the statistics of people where their application failed for applications to vote by post. I don't have that figure to hand. It wasn't huge, I don't think, but I can't swear to it. I can provide that to you all afterwards, probably, if I can get it out of the system somehow.
Yes, I think it would be useful.
And I've also had the numbers of postal votes that were rejected for the normal reasons around low date of birth, signature missing, mismatches, all that.
I guess the second question, and it follows from what the questions that Councillor Vaughan was asking on people, EU citizens, and the process you'll be going through to get them registered. How will that continue over the years to come? Because obviously, you know, someone who is not eligible today, and as you mentioned, they will be crossed off the register now, but they may be eligible again in this few months, or, you know, a year or so. Is it a plan, or do we need to have plans, or is it just something completely on them to just come back to us and say, now we're eligible?
Yeah, so this will be a one-off exercise effectively, because there are people who are currently registered. Should they not stay on the register is one sort of journey, if you like. In the future, 5 years from now, a French national perhaps moving into the borough will make an application to register to vote. And as part of that application, they will be asked for name, age, date of birth, national insurance number, nationality, are you here? You know, with settled status, or and that'll be either yes or no. And if it's no, then they won't be registered. Same as it would be for somebody applying who's any other application. So the new application will mean that they either go on the register or they don't go on the register.
Thank you. And if I just ask, sort of bringing the two items we've had on the agenda together, do you have any idea, any indication of the customer experience with electoral services. I don't remember exactly what it is, but if I remember correctly, at the election, is it that there's no dedicated inbox for people to email in, or there's no dedicated phone number? I remember there being the case that people were trying to get in touch, but they had to go through someone else to let them to electoral services. I can't remember the exact details, but maybe you can expand, but just wondering about, resident experience with contacting electoral services, and if you have any idea.
Sure. Funny enough, at the beginning, I was listening closely to Nicola's presentation. I have just emailed the contact centre to say, do we have stats of what kinds of queries and questions we were getting? And the answer is normally we do get that, but I haven't. Either I've had it and haven't absorbed it, or I haven't had it yet. We have a contact centre in Rochdale, so that's where our contact centre is. So there's one number for people to phone there. Obviously, this election, it was the most recent election with the general election. There's quite a lot of cross-boundary stuff. So people were perhaps phoning us when they needed to speak to Hounslow or KNC and vice versa. We tried quite hard to keep that to a minimum, but there's no way around that. Things like the online services, like the online portal for registration, the online portal for postal voting and all the rest of it is done nationally, and then it just pings into our electoral management system. And we have our own electoral services email, which is again initially is dealt with by the contact centre in Rochdale. And then there's a kind of almost a back office email coming back to electoral services admin, where people can get hold of us directly. Have I got stats available? No, and that's why I was very interested, as I say, in Nicola's presentation, because that's something that would be very useful for us to know, is where are the tensions. We look at things like the complaints. Obviously, we keep tallies in polling stations about what kinds of queries and concerns and things that have gone wrong are happening, but I don't have good analytics really that actually some of your REAP stuff will really help us with.
And we probably can get more of that now. And I just want to correct you. Just because when you say about the contact centre in Rochdale, some of the staff are still in Rochdale because they were two-peed over. We bought that contact centre in-house and it's now part of the corporate contact centre. But there are some staff who were two-peed over that are working remotely in Rochdale, but it is our corporate contact centre.
Seamless.
And if it's made just a final question. I know we've talked before about how you'd like to see automatic voter registration in an ideal world, and I know that during the election, the now government said that this will be something we'll be looking at bringing. I don't know if you've heard anything, if there's been any discussion in the electoral services circles.
There is always discussion in electoral services circles. We're quite geeky, really. So sadly. I mean, do I name drop slightly? I will. I'm going to a roundtable with the minister in 2 or 3 weeks. So hopefully he will expand, or he or she will expand for what the plans are a little bit more at that point. We think though through my association channels, Association of Electoral Administrators, which I'm also in, that it will probably be a year or two before we actually see kind of concrete plans. But yeah, as I understand it, there's going to be looking at either auto enrolment or some sort of data mining type thing. It's not quite clear yet what the government has in mind exactly for that. And likewise, obviously, we've got the 16 and 17-year-olds enfranchisement, and it'll be interesting to obviously learn presumably from the Scottish experience when they introduced that a few years back, and Wales for their elections as well. So there's still lots and lots of change coming down the line. At the moment, it feels a little bit nebulous. Yes, we know these things are coming, but I don't think we're going to see any concrete changes really for at least 18 months. But discussions are happening, and lots of us are getting involved in speaking to civil servants and politicians and all of that to think about how that might work and what the expectations are. I don't know if that didn't tell you really very much, did it? Apart from I'm going to be talking to people. Sorry.
No, that was very helpful. I would just ask finally, I mean, obviously you're going to have a year off from elections the next year, but all of us, I would say. What else is on the radar? I think you mentioned that there's a polling district review upcoming on polling places. Anything else that's happening?
Yeah, so there is a polling districts and places review that's statutory that we need to get through to council ideally by December, but it will have to be January now. I'm not anticipating really that we have massive change. We don't really need massive change. We did quite a big review a few years back, and also we can do a review whenever we want. We don't have to stick to 5 years, but we have to do one this year. So that's happening. We've just started the annual canvas. Councillor Vaughan mentioned getting an email, I think, probably from us. So those have just started, and the forms, the physical bits of paper go out this weekend, a bit later, obviously, than normal because of the small event that we ran earlier in the year when we would normally be doing this stuff. So what else have I got on? That's enough. That's enough. Planning for the year after that, obviously, when we've got the borough elections coming up. So yeah, so we've got a fair bit on at the moment.
Councillor Perez and then Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the work that you've done to alert voters about voter ID, so what has worked in terms of raising awareness? I know the different organizations that you work with and the different methods that you use and publicity materials, but from your analysis, what has worked and what do you think we should be focusing on going forward in terms of maybe alerting residents that we feel we need to reach out to get better engagement?
It's hard to know what works because we do such a lot. So it's quite difficult to pin down, was it the social media stuff that we did? And we did a lot. The comms team put a huge amount of effort in for us, which was great. And, you know, we had a tweet picked up by an LBC presenter, which was great because it was one of the young people who had written that particular thing. So I was very pleased on their behalf, apart from anything else. So it's hard to know. I think exactly what's worked and what hasn't. It's not just us trying to get people aware of what's happening. There was the Electoral Commission, GLA, others as well. So pinning it down is difficult. I personally think, putting things like a booklet in the poll card helped. It's expensive, mind, but I think that probably helped, that flyer, because that's the thing that people take with them to the polling station. So they are going to look at that if they're going to vote. So I think that we know reaches every voter. So whereas other things perhaps don't. I think some of the visual stuff around the borough helps. And I think that's what we need to be doing more of. But I think now we have got a bit of time. I think what we ought to do really is go out and actually speak to members of our community and ask them, what did you see? What did you see? Where would you have, why didn't you see this? I think that's the conversation we could probably have. Now we have the luxury of a little bit of time to go and ask, where do people want this information and where do they actually see it? Because it feels a bit scattergun really at the moment still.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. Hi. Can I just echo members' thanks there for all of the work earlier this year. The overnight on the 4th of July was just so impressive watching everybody work, and it's a fantastic organisation. Thank you so much. I have a question that I'm sure that there isn't an easy answer for, but I'm really interested in some of the figures that we've got here for things like proxy votes and postal votes. And it occurs to me that it'd be really interesting to know what change of behaviour, if any, that there was. We know that turnout was reduced in kind of all of the areas. The council, all of the constituencies underneath the council. And I don't know if we saw an increase in postal voting or an increase in the number of proxies or even last minute proxies and how that compares nationally. I suppose I'm really interested to know if did any of this these new rules that we expected to try and were going to reduce the number of people going out to vote, did it do that? Or
yeah, I can't honestly answer that. I don't know. The Electoral Commission has done, and I wish I'd read the report a bit more deeply, but the Electoral Commission has looked at the people who didn't vote and asked them why they didn't vote. Some of them, and they did this after the May elections last year as well. Some of them will cite the changes, for example, about voter ID. I don't know if they've asked that same question about postal voting and did the requirement to give national insurance number make a difference to you or not? I don't know. I certainly don't know the answers to that. I think that's something that would need, more sophisticated research than I can do, quite honestly.
And did we see any changes locally, like more or less postal votes? I mean, we saw less voting. We just saw less voting. We know this. But did we see anything else? Any kind of more proxies? Any less postal votes? That kind of thing.
I would say, well, compared to what are we talking about? 2019 or 2017, 2015?
We've got so many to
up and
choose
down.
from, so
So
we
many
can
up and
go for
down.
any of these.
So yeah, I mean, I have got some stats, and I can bring them back about how many we had as a percentage of voters voting by post this year, how many actually used that postal vote compared to the previous years. I don't have those figures with me, and I did look after the election, but I can't honestly remember the answer. Sorry, that's I hadn't prepared for that question. Sorry.
No, thank you for that answer.
Okay, thank you. I just want to echo some of the committee's comments about, you've had a lot on basically with all these changes and all these elections. So well done to you and the team. It's been, I think you did take on board quite a lot of the comments that we were making about our concerns when all of this sort of began. Probably about a year ago. I can't remember when you first came, but I know we raised it. So thank you for taking all of that on board. It's obviously something that the committee is interested in, so we will keep an eye on it. And I think there's a little bit of a request for some extra little bits of data. So if you could get back to us with that, just so that we've got a note for the next meeting, that would be absolutely wonderful. So, but thank you very much for all the hard work, and let's hope that you do get a little bit of a breathing space to do some other things now. Thank you
very much.
Okay, so that brings me to the final item on the agenda, which is the forward programme. I've got a list here. There are obvious things that we do need to look at, like the budget. And I just want to mention the last item on the agenda, which is the greening the grey workshop feedback recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Daly. I think you attended to that along with a couple of cabinet members. I think all of the committee were invited, but it was in the daytime, so I understand that's difficult for people. But at some point, we will bring that item to the committee and just develop some of the ideas in terms of our policies going forward. So I'm not sure what our timescale will be on that, but it is definitely, it was a really good workshop. And I think it's definitely worth us having discussion here to inform, not just the relevant cabinet members, but it's, across the council issue, which is what we're very much trying to look at this committee. So I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions about that, or if they want to make any comments about the forward programme, or if they just like to note it and say we can all go home. Noted. Right, great. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to the meeting and your comments. Thank you.